First of all, I think we should give a big round of applause to the DevGAMM team because they've done an amazing job. They've set this all up. They've worked late into the night. Please, a round of applause for the amazing DevGAMM team. And also, I think something that I would like to mention is the people working in the back, the translators, are doing a fantastic job for you guys there who don't speak English. Also, a round of applause for the translators over there. Yeah. So to kick this off, my name is Carola Berens. I'm a senior game designer at DICE, and I'm going to talk about the AI that we used in the Battlefield single player. So a quick introduction for those who don't know me. I currently work at EA DICE, as I said. The last year, I actually spent working on the Star Wars Battlefront 2, which is launching today, by the way. Thank you. I was the lead designer for mounts and specials on that one, and I've been working on that for the last year. But before that, and more importantly, what we're here talking about today, I was working as a senior technical designer for the Battlefield 1 single player. Before that, I worked at Ghost on the Need for Speed games for a few years, in Gothenburg, also in Sweden, and had some stints at a few smaller companies. So Funcom, we did Age of Conan and The Secret World, MMORPGs, and working on the Anno franchise for Ubisoft-related designs. And then I started off originally as a localization QA for Rockstar. So I worked on all the GTAs from back in the days, some Take-Two games. But originally, my background is actually in IT and business, so I don't have a traditional games education. And I think that's always important. I always feel that's important to point out for people who feel like they want to work in the games industry but don't have the experience. So it is possible to work in games without actually having gone and done a game design course at a university. I mean, in my case, it was that back in the days, these courses actually didn't exist. But now there is the chance, so that's a good thing for the industry. All right, but let's talk about what we're actually talking about today. So first of all, I'm just going to quickly say what the Battlefield 1 single player was actually about. I don't know how many people here have actually played the Battlefield 1 single player. Show of hands. Yeah, that's a good amount. Okay, so at least you guys know what I'm talking about. And then go a bit deeper into what our narrative team, our writing team, was actually asking for us to present on the game design side. Then we are going to have a quick look at Frostbite and the AI types. So Frostbite is DICE's or EA's own engine. Going a bit deeper into the technical sides of these things. And then talk how to look more I than A, so more intelligent than artificial. What did we do to have AI walking around and look like they are alive rather than following a path or standing around? And then finally, we're going to talk about what we learned and what was good and what wasn't. So first, I'm going to show you the official Battlefield 1 single player trailer from last year. If you haven't seen it yet, that's all right. Just lean back and enjoy it. If you have seen it, I would like to ask you to have a look at the in-game scenes and think about when you see the level, when you see the environments, what that means for the AI and what that means for gameplay and the presentation of it.
They push, we push. Every once in a while, we push hard enough that the light breaks through the clouds and a world beyond the war glimmers. Behind every gun sight is a human being. We are those people.
Promise me that you'll get me back in one piece.
Okay, I promise.
Come on! You may find you're out there all alone. You know that.
You can never stop the progress of machines!
If history only remembers 1 in 1,000 of us, then that future will be filled with stories of who we were and what we did. But until that day comes, we will stand. We will look death in the eye, and we will fight.
All right, so this was the presentation from last year that we did on the single player trailer. And what did we learn from this trailer? Can anyone point out some things? No? Okay. It might be complicated if you're going through the translators. Okay, so first of all, this is World War I. So everything in there that we have, that we didn't have so much in the last few battlefields, is we actually have battlefields with armies. We have the planes, the tanks, the infantry, we have the melee, we have the one-on-one. We have so many different types of combat and gameplay that we needed to cover, and cover it with AI as well. And it was a very diverse setting. So we had the desert, we had the Italian coast, we had the tank levels, and we had very different storylines that all had very different requirements for what it meant for the AI. So first of all, and that was one of the biggest challenges for us, World War I was a war fought by an army of thousands on really big battlefields. So what that means is you have a lot of soldiers, and everyone who's worked with the game engine knows a lot of AI is not necessarily something that your game engine likes. So it was out in the open, so it wasn't a linear, completely linear level. It was a sandbox, and we had chaotic navigation for the AI. So Battlefield is known for having a lot of destruction in the levels, and that means that the AI needs to be able to account for that. We had dynamic obstacles, like doors getting destroyed, windows getting destroyed, houses getting destroyed, and we needed to be able to navigate all of these. But before we start talking about what that actually means, we're going to have a little break, and I'm going to talk about something completely different. This is a picture from a short film that I made while I was at university. My course was in media concepts, and one of the things that we needed to do was we needed to get together a full film production with cameras, set, lights, everything that goes on a professional film set. This was one of the scenes from that film. And what you see is it's nighttime, and you see the moon fall through the blinds onto the door. Now, actually getting this shot as a natural moon shines through the blinds, that's impossible. You just cannot do it. It's not going to have the crispness of the shadow. It's not going to have the light intensity that you need. So what do? In film, you fake everything. The way that we shot this thing is we were on a second-floor apartment that we had lent from a friend of a friend. And obviously, we couldn't put a light outside the window to shine through the blinds. So what we did is we took the blinds off the window, we set up a light, and we set up the blinds in front of our spotlight. So what you see here is actually completely fake. It doesn't look like that at all. And the whole point of me telling the story here is that if you can, you should fake it. Because what's important for your game is the player experience. You want the player to see or feel a certain thing, but if that thing, how that thing actually works in the background, is completely irrelevant to the player. All that matters is what the player sees in the end. So keep that in mind with all the things that we're going to talk about next. So Frostbite. Frostbite, as I said, is EA's own engine. However, that doesn't mean that this doesn't apply to Unity, to Unreal. All of what I'm going to talk about, you can easily transfer to any other game engine. Frostbite is a full toolset that we use internally. It has a level editor, it has full support for animations, physics, audio, cinematics, rendering. We have a full development team just dedicated for Frostbite. So we're pretty pampered in that way. It's specifically made for large-scale open-world gameplay and dynamic destructible environments, which is important to what we're going to talk about for the AI side of things. So, as I said before, there's going to be engine limitations. The challenge is we're going to have a budget for AI, and it's not an army of thousands. We're going to have a set amount of AI that we're going to be able to use, and we're going to have to be able to make this appear like there's a lot of players on the field, artificial or not. The main costs for the CPU for us came from pathfinding, from animations, from combat logic, and from the different LODs that the AI use, so level of detail, depending on how close or how far away you are. All of this costs CPU time. So the way that we faked it is that we use different tiers for the different AI. So the regular AI that you all know is the pathfinding is regular pathfinding. It can deal with dynamic obstacles. On the animation side, we use a high-res skeleton, which means the animations look amazing, but also they're really expensive. For the logic, it means they have senses, so they can hear you, they can see you, and they can react accordingly. They can attack, they can retreat, they can take cover. And finally, for the LODs or anything else, is we have to deal with full collision. That means bullets, explosions, world objects, and obviously the player. So what we came up with is we needed something that was cheaper. So we developed a low-spec AI that was meant to cost less on the CPU side, but would, from the player experience, still offer you the same benefits. What it means in actual implementation terms was that we didn't use pathfinding for these guys, but we enabled them to run on collision. So if you had a hill, if you had rubble on it, as long as there was collision, they'd be able to navigate on it. For the animations, we used a lower res skeleton, which means they were also cheaper, they had a lower bone count. And the hit reaction logic and everything having to do with actually dying was very scripted and very cheap. So they did get a hit reaction when they were hit, and they could die, but they could not shoot back to you. So this would be something that you'd see far off in the distance, and you could say, I want to shoot that guy and I want to kill that guy, and you could do that. However, those guys would never actively react back to you. And then finally, they didn't actually have collision. They had bullet collision, so you could shoot them. But if you would manage to get close enough to them, they wouldn't have collision. And that's something I'm going to talk about in a second. And third, and this is meant to be far off in the distance, mesh soldiers. So these were particle effects that we used the soldier meshes on. And what that meant is for pathfinding, they didn't use any pathfinding at all. They can follow terrain, and that's it. But they would clip through everything else. If you put a building in the middle of these guys' paths, they would just run through it. They didn't have a skeleton at all. It was an animated mesh. They had no detailed animations. It was good enough if you looked at them from far enough away, but actually close up, it didn't have the same quality of the tier 1 AI. As I said, those were mesh particles. They were spawned from emitters. They didn't have hit reactions like the low-spec AI. And the LODs were obviously, they were a lower model, and they had no collision at all. So if you shot these guys, nothing would happen. So this is what that looked like when we set up an emitter. These guys, they would just automatically, after a time, they would just die. And you see up close, it doesn't look that great, but they're meant to be far away from you as a decoration element, and essentially to fill up the battlefield with movement. So this is how we use them. In the center, you yourself are the player, and around you, in a fairly large radius, we would populate the level with AI, with proper AI that would react to you, that would fight you, and that would do everything that you would regular AI expect to do. Just on the outskirts of that, so within your shooting radius, within your notice radius, I would say, we would use the low-spec AI. And then on the outskirts, and as I said, this is so far away that you would never reach these guys, we use the meshes. And it's two overlapping circles. It's the player combat and the decoration circle, and they overlap on the low-spec AI. The important thing is that we had logic that could control that when you moved, obviously, you didn't want to move into the decorations. You would always want to stay the center as the player. So I just took the video from earlier and just marked what the cost for these guys would be. So close up to you would be the regular AI, and that's the bubble here, is one guy is one CPU cost unit. On the low-spec side, for the cost of one single AI, we would get 3 low-spec guys. So that's already 3 times the amount of people that we could use if we could trade one AI for one set of low-spec AI. And then if you look at the meshes, it's about 1 to 10. So taking one AI, we would get 10 soldiers in the distance for that. But then again, if you look at these circles, when the soldiers are far away, you don't get that much out of it. So the challenge is to decide at what point do I make a trade-off for the player experiencing good AI versus seeing a lot of soldiers on the level. So this is the approximate CPU cost. If we see this as one unit, the regular AI would be 1 CPU cost. And for that, we'd get 3 low-spec AI or 10 mesh soldiers. And this is how we use these guys. So this is from our plane level. You can see you actually have to kind of look into the picture and say, is there even soldiers there? I can't even tell. The thing is, you're not supposed to be able to tell. You're supposed to notice it out of the corner of your eye, that when you actually do look at it, you're like, oh man, there's like people running on the ground, even though I'm flying around in an airplane. The same in our tank level. So this is the very start of the tank mission. And you see in the trench next to the run-up area, all of these guys, these are low-spec AI because, yes, they're close to the player, but you can't actually go there. You can't interact with them. And they're friendlies as well, friendlies that won't experience combat. And that means that there is no need for these guys to have collision, to have pathfinding, to have any sort of intelligent logic. So in this case, we could have 10 of these guys. One thing that you might notice here is that the levels are fairly gray and gray. So one of the things that we also had to deal with was that because everything looks so similar, you might not necessarily see these 10 guys. So you have 10 guys there doing actions, but does the player actually experience these 10 guys? So more examples from the tank level. So this is literally like the first 2 minutes that I'm going to show you. This is AI again, because they're running right next to you, they're being shot. They will react to you if you drive into them with a tank. They will jump to the side, they will go, ah. And I think when they're hostiles, you can even run them over with a tank. in the background there, and I'm going to show you a video of this in a second, you can almost not make it out, but in the background there we have a ton of mesh soldiers just running and just following the terrain. These are so far away, you will never be able to get there. So in the foreground, this is what I just showed you. In the foreground, all of these are AI. So here on the right, you see some of the mesh soldiers moving. Again, they're so far away that it's more about the impression of something going on there rather than being able to make out the individual soldiers. I think the guys that run up on the bridge that is going to get blown up in a second, those are low-spec AI, because again, they will be scripted. There they go, and they blow up. So anything that we use for very scripted events, they were also low-spec AI in general. That guy was real. He was a pain in the ass. All right, so that was a quick introduction to like our 3-tiered AI system that we use to populate the battlefield. And now I'm going to quickly talk about what we actually did for the tier 1 AI, so the proper AI, to make it look more intelligent. So there were 2 focus points that we had to improve. One was navigation, and one was a legible idle. So navigation means being able to move into difficult places. That means being able to go up on the 2nd floor of a building, being able to go through doors. I mean, that sounds really easy, but trust me, doors is like the hardest thing in level design that you can do. Being able to climb up on ledges, being able to jump fences, all of these things, those are things that you actively have to work for. Legible idle, this is something that came from the narrative team as well, where they wanted to present an era-appropriate impression of what soldiers would be doing at that point in time. So it was about hearing conversations about the war in the appropriate language, or inspecting war posters, or playing with a gramophone, all of these things, just to like give the impression of actually being there and to improve the era narrative. So this is a shot from our level editor. This is what the pathfinding looks like. So the green areas are pathfinding, and the white areas are blocks where AI cannot cross. So this could be a fence, this could be a house, this could be anything that you want the AI not to be able to cross. Now you see in the back here, the pathfinding isn't blocked all the way. So if the AI was standing on the left side and the player was standing on the right side, if the AI wanted to reach the player, it would have to go all the way to the top and run all the way down again. And obviously that is not very realistic. If you add a fence, for example, you want the AI to be able to interact with that fence. And for that, we had path links. So there's that little purple arrow here. We could either define on a point for things like doors and windows, or on an area for things like fences, where we said, this is your start point, and this is your end point, and this is the animation that you're playing to cross this obstacle. So this way, we could make AI deal with obstacles like fences. There you go, I got a video of that as well. So what that means is for specific assets, we have to get specific animations to match the height, to match like not the legs clipping through the wood, for example. So we have to get specific metrics to the animation team for that as well. Another example, as I said, this is my favorite hate subject, is doors. Doors are so vastly complex, it's unbelievable. You can have an AI encounter a closed door, that's fine. You can have AI encounter an open door, that's also fine. But what happens if the player is there and is opening the door, meaning the door is in the process of changing state when the AI comes in? That just leads to huge problems, and it's a lot of work getting these to work right. The door can get blown up. The door can open in a direction that the AI isn't expecting. There's so many edge cases that you have to deal with on AIs, and you have to align them correctly. You have to deal with different combat states. So for example, when they were just patrolling, the AI would just go in and open the door normally. In combat, however, the AI would run up to the door and just kick it in. So I think I also have a video for that. Let's see. Yes, there we go. These are the few examples of pathing. So ladders is another very good example. This is one for windows, I believe. Yeah, so they're climbing in through the open windows. This is for ledges. So this looked quite natural that he was just jumping down, but in fact this was also all very, not scripted, but it was very planned. There's some more window action. This guy's going to do an amazing leap over to the other platform. There you go. There you go, more window stuff. All right. So, for the idle, so that was the pathfinding covered. For the idle stuff, we were thinking, what are we doing with our AI while they're not doing anything? So we had some stealth sections, some night sections, where you actually see the AI just going around doing their thing. And traditionally, we would script these things by hand. However, this time around, we had a more systemic approach. So we defined points, or we wanted to be able to define points with a set of rules that the AI could use and then on their own decide what they wanted to do. So for example, we wanted to give them the option to go drink some water, go on a patrol, have a smoke, chat with your buddy, all the things that we talked about before. So the AI is ready, it's idle, it says, okay, what am I going to do next? This is what happened. So they were just like zigzagging all over the level. You couldn't predict where they were going. It was pretty terrible as a player experience. Because you couldn't learn anything from the AI, you couldn't learn behavior, you couldn't get a plan of attack of like, I'm going to sneak around back, because all of a sudden you could have just 5 AIs standing there, or none at all. So for us, for game designers, for balancing, this was pretty bad. Then the other option that we had was just restricting them and just having them 2 at a time or 1 at a time stay still in a place. Which also wasn't, it was a bit better, but it also wasn't particularly interesting because you want AI to be moving around. So these AI are an example of AI that has conversations and AI that just stands still. So the trick was to somehow combine those two. So here, there's an example of what happened when we didn't restrict these guys. So this is a bit fast-forwarded. So through the course of the video, you're gonna see that all of these guys just do whatever they want. They work on the tank a bit, they go pee, they smoke, I think. They just do a bunch of things. All right. Now compare this to when we restrict the actions. So on the left, that guy is restricted to action points only around the tank. So all he does is, even though he has the freedom to decide what he wants to do next, he is restricted to choosing from actions on the tank. So this guy is going to be limited to the tank. The other two guys on the right, they're always going to stand by the fire. I think eventually they also patrol to the other guy who's standing up there, who's having a smoke. But in general, this is readable to the player. The player knows there's a guy working on the tank, there's guys standing by the campfire having a chat, and their back is always turned to me, and then there's one guy who might be moving around. So while we still had the systemic approach of letting the AI decide what they want to do and not having a scripted loop, they were better presented to the player. And one of these parts could just be that we're combining the moving, so like being able to predict where this thing is going, with the combinations of like doing static actions in a spot for a while. All right, so our conclusions. The low spec and the no spec AI, we could reuse quite well to create large crowds. The important part was to have intelligent level design, so to spawn and unspawn these guys in a way that was invisible to the player, and to populate the field in a way that you would always get the impression of a lot of people around you, but at the same time that all the ones that you encountered directly were reacting intelligently to you. We would only use real AI when we interacted with the player, and we used advanced pathfinding to make the AI more agile. So if you were up on the roof sniping everyone, it could actually happen to you that the AI would come up behind you from the ground floor. We had context-driven idle behavior, what we just talked about on the, we called them action stations. And it made the AI appear more lifelike, more error-appropriate, more supporting the narrative for the individual levels. And all of this was done systemically, so there was no big scripting setup involved. All we had to do is define action points and define which AI were allowed to do these things, and then the AI would decide independently what they were going to do for all of these things. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. We have time for questions.
So yeah, we have time for questions. Ребята, у нас стоит стоечка.
Guys, we have a mic stand here, so if any of you have questions, please go ahead and ask them. For questions, we're going to give you presents. Итак, кто-нибудь? Конечно, у вас же есть вопросы. Итак. Это не обязательно спрашивать про игру, можно спросить вообще, какое у меня любимое мороженое.
Hi. What's about transforming one
Привет. Что по поводу трансформирования один тип искусственного интеллекта в другой? Например, обыкновенный AI.
It's good, it's bad. Why you don't do this in your game?
So let me try and get this right. You're asking why aren't we using the low-spec AI in more parts of the game? Or what was the first part of the question?
There is low-cost AI, and player get closer to it, and it's transformed into regular AI.
Oh, you mean transitioning between the AI?
Yeah.
It's a good idea, and we suggested that in certain points, and we are using that on certain systems. So, for example, the loading system uses that. When you're really close to a model, I think we have like 6 different levels of loading. If you're really close to an AI, it will be super detailed. But when you get further away, and I'm still talking about actual AI, when you get further away, we're reducing the level of detail on the textures, and I believe also on the model, the further away the AI moves, and that reduces cost. What you have to keep in mind here is that we were strictly talking about the AI budget that we were given from the engine. And a budget is a very arbitrary amount that the tech guys give us. For the other stuff, like the pathfinding and the skeletons and so on, in theory it's doable. We have a tech team that could support this. However, this wasn't how we were planning to use the system. But it is thinkable that you could use it that way.
Thank you.
Welcome.
If the player comes closer to low-cost AE, would it switch to regular AE, or he will find that it's a fake?
So they would not switch because that would then also involve them getting more expensive again. That is why we had the trade-off of saying they can have some reactions to you, but they just will not behave that way. The more important question for us was, in the level, how do we populate the AI and the low-cost AI so that we don't get that situation, so that the player does not actually get so close to a low-cost AI that we would have to wonder, are they going to see that this is fake? So this is it's a lot of gut feeling and a lot of testing also with our UXR groups to figure out where the barrier is, like how far away can we spawn real AI and at what point can we spawn low-cost AI?
Is it so expensive to use dynamic AI which will switch between low-cost AI and AI when player would come very close to it?
It wasn't so much a matter of the cost. So first of all, yes, it would be expensive, but also it was a matter of these models and these setups for soldiers not supporting that. So as I said, they had a different animation skeleton, they had a different animation setup, they didn't have all the pathfinding logic, and all of this is required in order to use the regular AI setup. So if they can't use Pathfind, if they can't use our cover system, if they can't interact with the path links, we can't switch to the complex AI system.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I think there's one more question.
Is there some sort of trigger system in the advanced UI which enables them to react to the player actions, and how often the UI analyze player's action and how he can decide what to do with that?
So we have different states for the AI, and depending which state they're in, we're giving them different types of reactions. So if we were talking about a full-on, we're already in combat, like with the tank mission, their reactions will be they see you from quite far away. I think it's like 70 meters or something. And depending on how threatened they feel, like how much damage they took recently, they will either decide on attacking you or looking for a nearby cover. If you have the other situation where they are still idle, they don't know that you're around, they will have hearing as well. So, for example, sprinting would make them react to the player presence, but crouching wouldn't. And this isn't so much a tick system, rather than it's event-based, so that just happens on the engine. When the engine detects noises being played, it will automatically change the AI into suspicious state, and then the AI will start investigating, and then you have your grace period, where it says, I'm currently detecting you, where you still have like a second or two to go and hide. And then once you are in combat state, you can't really switch back to idle state because they know you're there. So it's not like in Assassin's Creed, for example, where they can go completely oblivious again. They will always go into suspicious mode, even if they can't see you.
Good morning, thank you for the lecture. My question is, what was the idea to don't use the bullet collision for the meshes AI, and does it not, maybe it can give the player a bad experience about that? I mean, in case if the player sees the enemy, he shoots them, but the enemy doesn't die because you don't have the bullet collision. What was the idea to use this point?
Again, this all comes down to how we built the levels. So the thought was that the mesh soldiers would be so far out, they would never be within weapons range. So if you remember the video from the tank mission, they were all the way to the right, and the tank doesn't shoot that far. If you try to like diverge and move into the right side of the level, you would eventually get an out of combat area message saying, go back to the fight, you can't desert. So just imagine the radiuses that we used for these guys. They're way bigger than I might have described. So if we felt at any point like there needed to be an interaction, like they needed to be shot, there would be low-cost AI. So mesh soldiers are in no case ever supposed to be close enough that you can shoot them.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I've got a question about path links. So the path links, which one you showed was one on the fence. Are they placed by hand on each level or in each prop? So how much time do you spend to place them? And what about destruction, level destruction? Because when the building destroys itself, when someone destroys the building, there will be different path links. And so it can be destroyed in different variations. And so there should be different path links. And how do you deal with this?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, and I forgot to mention that earlier, so thank you for bringing that up. The path links are dynamic, so in schematics, in our scripting language, we could control whether the path link was active or not. And if we take the example of the fence, if the fence received a destroyed event, we would disable that path link, and we had a second type of path link, which was a no animation path link. So in this case, we would remove the vault over the fence path link, so we would disable that and then enable the just walk path link. So the slide from earlier where we had the hole in the pathfinding, it would just look as if it was continuous pathfinding. And then for things like doors, we would have different path links. So, and that's why I said they're so complicated, because you'd have to check if the door is open. I just use that no animation path link to not play an open animation when I want to go through. And if the door is destroyed, same thing. And to your other question about prefabs versus placing them in levels, we tried initially to place the path links on very detailed prefabs, so like on the smallest possible unit. But then the problem was we had the level artist place crates or stones or God knows what next to something like that. And then we'd get the problem of like clipping through it or like, you know that. But we have several levels of how we build our prefabs in the level. So for example, the ladders was a really good example where we would have the house separately and we'd have a lit version of the house. And then everything that is in that house would be a separate asset. So you could have 2 or 3 different decoration assets that you could put in that house so it wouldn't look like it's cloned one-to-one. And then in those decoration assets, we'd have a separate asset for everything that has path links. So the ladders, the windows, and all of these. And we'd have the path links in those semi prefabs, and then you'd go like Lego and you'd put it all together, and then you'd know that you have nothing blocking the path link. What was the other part of your question? Was there something else? Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Hi, I wanted to ask if what you did in Battlefield 1, the tiered system, is drastically different from the previous Battlefield titles, because if I remember correct, you had single-player campaigns in previous titles as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So what did you do different compared to previous titles?
Right. So the idle actions that we had in Battlefield 4, for example, they would all be hand scripted. So we'd say there is a window here, so we need to place AI here that cleans the window. And if we wanted anyone else to clean that window, that wouldn't be possible, or we'd have to do individual scripts for all of these guys. And instead of saying, this guy is doing this thing, and then this thing, and then this thing, instead we said, at this point in the level, anyone can do this, or anyone that we define for this point can do this. And then over here, where we have a poster, you can go here and look at the poster. So we instead of saying, this AI can do this thing, we defined places in the level and said, these are points where things can be done. And then we defined which groups could use this thing. So for example, with the tank, we said only the mechanics are allowed to use these defined action points around the tank, and everyone else has to do something else.
Good morning. Thank you for a very good lecture. I have a few questions for you, and the questions are about animations and animation transitions. First of all, there was a lot of mistransitions in AI while you were showing us a video. For example, when the bot have made his epic jump and he was running to the machine gun, he ran about a meter after machine gun, and he went back, and there was a blended transition, and it was like slow motion back, and it was something which wasn't very smooth. And what about the door? It was something like this, and there in a few moments there was really missed a transition, and there was intermediate reaction where there was animation A, animation B, and there was no transition, and the state was missed. And first of all, is it was something that you planned to do and to optimize your game with the mission of transition for bots, or this is something you can't handle on and you really have a problem with positioning of bots and handling of correct coming up to transition where bot is acting with something?
So these are actually two different examples of transitions. They might look very similar, but in tech, they actually do different things. So I'm going to do the door first, because that's easier. The door is, so first of all, these were example videos that I captured. So they weren't, apart from the tank version, the others, they were test setups. So I didn't put a lot of work into making them look good, because I just wanted to demonstrate the technique.
It was a test transition, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
On the machine gun thing, that is not something that we script. That is in code and from the animation system itself. So that I cannot answer because I don't actually know that much about our animation system.
Do you use correct exact points, or are you using interactable zones, which are triggers?
Yeah. So for the path links, for example, for the vaulting, you saw was quite a bit off on the fence, which I said usually we have to request the metrics so it looks good. The way that we set these up is that in our editor we can scrub the animation and we can see the skeleton, and what we do is we define the start point and the end point, and then we see the connection point in the animation and line it up with the fence, for example, or also the door. So if I reach out, I take the point of the animation that connects to the door and align the path link to that.
I'm sorry, I probably think you misunderstood me. I was asking about the state when the bot is coming to obstacle, and he sees obstacle, and he interacts with obstacle. What does he produce to interact with obstacle? Interaction zone, which can explain why you have some problems with animation, or you have an exact point, which also can explain, but from the different way. So you are colliding with physics, or you're using some other ways?
Yeah, okay. It is depending on the path link. So if you remember that purple arrow, the start point, you can define a radius around it, at which point you say, if you're within that radius, you can start the animation. So it is a fair point. We've had a lot of issues, and this looked like way worse when we initially started this, but the transition from the regular coded animations into the pathing animations, those come from saying, am I allowed to go on this path link animation already? And that in most cases, I think it's like a 1 meter radius about the path link start point, but it's actually the code that decides at which point to stop the regular animation and at which point to start the pathing animation.
And do you miss some transitions on mesh bots to optimize your GPU and CPU time, and just see them idle running, idle line, idle shooting, and don't allow users to see transitions, to just see some default actions which are cycled?
So not as a state thing. We could actively say, this guy is only ever supposed to lie on the ground and avoid transitions that way. But if they ever do switch states, so if they can be alerted, for example, if they're sleeping, there will always be a transition. However, one thing that we do is, if the user is facing away from the AI, so the AI is here, we lighten the computation load, and we cull it out, and we do the animation calculation in the background. And then once you look back in that direction, it will have progress to the part in the animation that you would expect, but the actual calculation for the animation isn't done.
So probably you need to use extrapolation to know before, yeah?
You don't need to know it before, you do it in runtime, but you don't need to do all the calculation for all the bones. You just time the part in the animation, and then as soon as you look back at it, you just resume the animation at the point that you got to.
And this is a little bit wider than the foe, yes?
Sorry?
It is a little bit wider than your foe.
I think it's like 10 degrees or so past your FOV.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, that was the last one. Thank you everyone for coming here.